Hi guys, it's Sean.
And Chris. So here on day 76, we're concluding a series of shorter days that internally we referred to as the montage.
The goal was to figure out a way to let you play through the passage of time.
The inspiration came from a few different places, and Sean, you can sort of correct or add as necessary. One was just obviously the cinematic concept of a montage. We thought that's just a cool way to, convey long passage of time without spending a huge amount of the player's time relative to that.
You referencing movies made me think of every sports montage ever, like
Uh-huh.
every training montage, and then remembering that for like 3 weeks I was obsessed with this idea because we were trying to figure out ways to come up with new gating mechanics.
Uh-huh.
And I was like, oh, there should just be like ledges and stuff that Henry isn't strong enough to pull himself up.
Uh-huh.
And then inside of this montage, there should be like a part where Henry goes like underneath his tower, and there's this like a support pole that goes across
Right.
it, and you
A
can just
tension
do
rod.
pull-ups,
Yeah.
and you can do pull-ups
I
two or three
forgot about
times
that.
during the
Yeah.
montage, and then by the time we get to day 76, Henry just
ripped.
has the strength, the
Yeah.
upper body strength, to pull himself to higher, which would explain the new gating mechanic. So it
Right.
was like sports montage to the
Yeah.
max. We would have
Yeah.
had to get like another 80s song in
Like
the
a
game or
jock
something.
jam.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I would have killed for a jock jam in this
Yeah.
game.
Yeah.
I would have
Yeah.
given up Etta James for a jock jam in this game. Just kidding. I absolutely would not.
No.
Anyway,
Sports montages, as well as film montages, important influence here. Also, the game 30 Flights of Loving,
big
I
one.
think, yeah, that is a very short, like 10-minute experience. If you look it up, 30 Flights of Loving, by a guy named Brendan Chung, who's just a brilliant independent game developer. I did the music for that game coincidentally, and uh, that game is pretty much entirely told through a series of hard cuts out of chronological order. And when we sort of combined what we liked about that and thought would work in our game with the existing day structure that we talked about earlier, it just made sense as this sort of second act of the game. Something that I think is surprisingly rare in games. You don't see a lot of montage in video games.
No. And I kind of know why. It's
Yeah,
technically actually
it's not even
really
really.
hard.
It is really hard, and actually strayed from our original concept, which was much more of a montage with very quick
Yeah.
shots. I mean, it's a stretch maybe actually to call it a montage because
Right.
you play several minutes of game at a time.
Yeah.
You know.
There is a moment in here like where you can if you take all the food
Oh
from
yeah,
the
you'll if you do that,
you'll get
you'll get a
a
bonus
very
track.
small day, and I'm sure
Yeah,
there's a tape on that.
there is. Yeah.
That is montage-y in length,
Hmm.
but it's a technical hurdle to make a montage.
It's hard. You have to load the entire world in and out
Yeah, so you
suddenly.
made like being able to cut on a beat like a montage would sort of impossible because we're
Mhm.
loading scenes and moving you all over the map and redressing the scene every time, and
Yeah.
you have to actually build quite a technological underpinning to do one, and I think that's maybe at the core something
Yeah.
we discovered at least.
Yep. Hey, it's Chris again.
And it's James again.
This moment by the lake where you get punched out by the person who turns out to be Ned Goodwin is one of the few times in the game where we have a complete takeover cutscene like this, sort of fully animated.
It shoulders the burden for the whole second half of the game of the player feeling scared. Like when they get to the research site, a lot of people have talked to me about they were always worried that they were going to get punched again because it happens from behind, so they're constantly sort of like spinning the camera around. It's along with like the rope breaking on day one, it's probably like one of the biggest punchy action set pieces I got to animate. And it's also interesting that like most of the action happens off camera, so I'm sort of implying a bunch of stuff and then sort of handing it over to audio and being like, okay, you need to basically make most of this actually work.
Yeah, scoring this was almost like scoring a tiny little radio drama because there are the sort of creeping footsteps behind you and they're panning slightly from right to left as they approach, and then there's the big like Indiana Jones style fist punch sound, which was really fun. That was definitely the most outrageous sound I got to put in this game. And then the ringing, yeah, it was really fun. This moment changed a fair amount because it was so incredibly difficult to communicate to the player, oh, there's this exact little thing on the ground that you have to notice and pick up, and you have to do that for the game to progress. There was actually a version of this where you didn't technically need to pick up the radio, and it just led to way too much like design uncertainty and confusion.
Yeah, this was definitely one of those points where we had to be realistic about, is the game actually getting better for giving you the option to completely ignore every single part of the through line of the game? And in this case, we said, no, it's not actually.
Yeah, a lot of this game ended up being about finding a compromise between player expressivity and actually making sure some kind of coherent story got told. So this was quite a significant example of that in development. Took a long time to nail down, but I'm pretty happy with where it ended up.
Hi, Jane.
Hi, Sean. There's a turtle here.
There's a turtle here. I think it's probably your doing, even though in classic Camposanto form, playing like autopsy detective on how the turtle got into the game is not yielding any definitive results.
I think I remember wanting something. Like I said, I just want a place that's very pleasant in the game, and I also want something very cute in the game. I think that was kind of on my wish list.
And we killed 2 turts with 1 stone here.
And, yeah, and then someone maybe said something about turtles, and then
A turtle, I think a turtle fit into the scope of what creature we could let you find and manipulate and animate.
Yeah,
And we weren't afraid of it then.
because we were also
We
thinking
had the idea
like,
really early, and we were afraid of animals.
yeah, because you're like, what if someone wants to like throw a thing? Like if you throw a cute animal, usually that will hurt the animal, and then maybe someone said it would be fine if it's a turtle.
And you can definitely launch this turtle right into the lake, and hopefully Henry will say something about it if you do, which is one of my favorite moments in the game. And then I think Turt Reynolds, the name that you can choose for him, was a bad joke made by a guy who shares an office with us, Zach Johnson from the Kingdom of Loathing. He came out and said, "What about Turt Reynolds?" And we all groaned, and then I wrote it down.
And then we were like, well, now we have to have a turtle in the game.
Yeah. And then Turt made his debut at E3 2015 in the Firewatch E3 trailer, and people lost their silly minds.
Yeah,
for
we were like,
Turt.
if we put Turd in this trailer, then we have to make it work in the finished game.
Yeah, he has to be a cornerstone. And then, you can feed him when you put him in you can give him a granola bar when you put him in the
Yeah, I
box
think
back in your tower. I think that's still in the game. Yeah, you got all your wishes.
I know.
So here we are at the gate of what Henry only knows is Wapiti Meadow.
Soon to be known as Wapiti Station.
Dun dun dun. So we can even talk about how you actually technically don't have to come here on this day at all, but presuming you haven't done anything strange, you now have to attempt to break in to this weird fence that's just seemingly out of nowhere in the middle of the woods.
And realizing that the story needed that, we then were in a pickle where we went, well, we've never made you do anything like that before. Like, go and do an adventure game thing. Like, use an object with an object. And so we kind of put ourselves in a position via the story. And I think this is what I would classify as, like, not great game design, folks.
Correct.
Where for lack of, I'll take full credit, I guess, had pushed us into a place with the story where you needed to try to get into this place to justify going somewhere else less important to find a way to get in later. Because when you're telling a story, like, and then you have to kind of create a diversion, you don't want to be like, the most important thing you want is behind this gate, but you need to go elsewhere to get behind it. It's like the biggest, like, bugaboo of adventure game design, but we had written ourselves right into it, and the story was now like, or the game design was now subservient to the story, which is really bad if you're a game designer or an aspiring game designer.
Not the best place to be.
Not great. So Nels and Will and James set about piecing together the concept of being able to pick up things and then contextually change the action you could do with those things. And in terms of look and feel, I think you guys did a great job of being able to pick up the rocks that are to the left of the gate. There is, you probably don't know this player because it's very difficult to see, but there is a stick to the right of the gate.
And there's another one off to the left. Once you try to get in some fashion, the game is agnostic about which. Then you can say like, hey, Delilah, I don't think I can get in here. And of course, in like, classic Firewatch fashion, there's a bunch of very subtle like micro branches where if you actually try to break in with all 3 of the things, Henry's like, I tried to smash it and break it. I can't do it. So there's like a little bit of reactivity there that's cool. But also me and James and Will basically had to go through like a baton death march to get this to work, just because nothing else in the game at all works this way. With like object, because the objects, they're in your hand, but then as you use them on the gate, then they're destroyed, but they have to go somewhere and it has to sync up with a special. It's just any one element that is complicated to do in the game to make look nice, and it has like all 10 of them.
And it's not built on any sort of like reusable system, because
No.
we didn't imagine we were making a game where you would use thing on a thing like you do in like Monkey Island or whatever. But
Yeah.
we walked ourselves right to that, unfortunately. But I think you guys did a valiant job, and
Well,
I
thank you.
really love the way it actually feels to do it. I am just glad I wasn't the gameplay programmer on it. I'm very happy about that.
Lucky you.
This is Jared Emerson Johnson. I work for a company called Bay Area Sound. We did a lot of the sound editing and sound recording for the game. A lot of the ambience and a lot of the effects.
And I'm Chris Remo, and you've heard me on commentary before, but on this one I'm speaking in my capacity as, I guess, the audio director on this game, a role that I really did not deserve to have, and basically had to figure out as I was going along. We ended up developing, I think, a pretty close working relationship where we sort of split the sound design duties. It ended up being fairly half and half, probably slanted towards Jared in terms of total work volume.
Although you did you did the entirety of all the implementation. So you were sort of the mastermind of, what we needed and how it should go in the game. And I just kind of took whatever you needed from me and made it. So I was sort of the content horse, and you were the overseer and
Overlord.
obviously the overlord of sound. Yeah, which was great. I mean, it's funny you mentioned that you were inexperienced, but it was smoother than some projects go, and it was a lot of fun for me.
Yeah, and you at one point went and did some field recordings.
The sound in the game kind of breaks down pretty evenly between sound effects, which are the footsteps and the interactive parts of the sound where the player's interacting with objects and things in the game, and then there's the ambience part. And especially in this game, in any game, the ambience is important, but in this game, that was sort of really where we started and finished in terms of what the sound needed to be in creating this space. And I actually had several recordings I've been making over the past 10 years or so, various other big outdoor national park locations, stuff from Yosemite and stuff from... I've actually been hiking on the Pacific Crest Trail over the past 10 years, which is a trail that goes all the way from Mexico up to Canada. So it's great. So, I mean, really, all of the ambient sound you're hearing is really coming from real wild spaces up in the mountains.
Yeah, and the ambience, man, I think it took us so long to dial in the approach we wanted to take, both in terms of the source material itself and also the way that it was designed and implemented.
Right.
I feel like we were revising that basically until like the last third of game development. I mean, not even just revising, but I would say like fundamentally changing how it worked. And eventually what's in the game now is sort of 3 layers of ambience that are mixed according to, where you are and the needs of the space and so on, plus additional what we called sweeteners of environmental noise, like sort of wildlife and wind rustles and things like that, to give it some character.
This project was really kind of unique in that way, in its relationship with the ambience, because it was such a key part of creating the atmosphere of it. We spent a whole lot of time figuring out how we wanted to sort of differentiate each of the individual sections of the park, and also at what point you are in the story, and how the ambience should subtly change. It was probably the most detailed ambience work I've done on, I think, any project I've ever worked on doing this, just because it had to be so specific and subtle, but also evoke really clear tonal feeling across the game.
Yeah, I'm really happy.
Hi, it's Jake.
And it's Jane.
We are at the medicine wheel, which
Yes.
was a thing that I put into the game when I was first grayboxing it and learning how to make anything in a game like this.
That was in really early, I think. Basically, we put in a tower, and then very soon afterwards, that was the medicine wheel.
Yeah, it was just like, I think it was a thing Sean and I thought would be cool to have in the game. I did not know how to make a medicine wheel, so, or rather, I didn't know how to make a video game, I guess. So I made it the way a real medicine wheel is made, which is out of a ton of tiny, tiny rocks, which meant that whenever anyone in the office turned their camera towards where the medicine wheel was,
From the tower.
the frame rate died. And then you went in and fixed it, which is great. And by replacing replacing it with like a real game thing that a real.
And also, it actually streams out really fast now.
yeah, it's like the
Anyway.
most efficient medicine wheel ever
it's
put in
great.
a game.
And it's a fantastic landmark, actually, because there's like nothing else like it in the game. I was like, oh, the medicine wheel, like you instantly know where you are.
Yep. When doing work on Firewatch's environment art and skies and all these other things, what do you keep in mind when you think about like a player has walked through here before? How do I keep it fresh when they come back through?
So we want to make sure that it looks different from different directions, and also the lighting and the feel of the whole area has got to be different, so it seems like a totally new area.
Yeah, it was surprising to me how much, even if you're walking like just north to south through an area, if you go through it once and then if you go through it the next day, or a later part in the game and you and Ollie have just swung the sun 180 degrees, so all the shadows are going the other way, it can feel completely fresh. Or the obvious trick is make them go through it the opposite direction.
Yeah.
But
But both things together really make a whole space feel like a totally new space.
yeah, that was a thing that I think you and Ollie and I collectively tried really hard to do, is like keep the player walking in as many different directions at as many different times of day as we could, because we knew that the world was fixed. It's not.
Yeah, like we want to reuse areas, but also we don't want to feel like we're making people backtrack, right?
Yeah.
Hi, it's Jane again. So Nels, what is a controlled burn?
A controlled burn is actually a technique that real wildland firefighters use. They actually have these amazing things called drip cans, which are basically like Tin Man oil can, except they're just full of like extremely flammable fluid and they're always on fire.
What?
So yeah, it's awesome. So basically firefighters will dig a bunch of like fire breaks and then use these drip cans to light a bunch of small controlled fires to burn out all the flammable materials in an area that that a big, like, proper uncontrolled wildfire is approaching, so that when the fire, due to the wind or whatever, gets to that area is already burned, so the fire can't keep spreading kind of past where that burn was. So in the case in the game right here, the idea is that the firefighter crew burned out all the fuel right next to the river, so that the fire couldn't be blown basically across the river. That the hope is between the controlled burn and the river itself, the fire wouldn't actually spread all the way up to Two Forks and beyond. As you will discover later in the game, they did not succeed at that. As is often the case in the real world, fires are nothing if not unpredictable.
In terms of technically how we achieve this, basically we have a pre-burn sector that is all lush and beautiful, full of trees that you cannot push through, so it works great as a gate. And after the controlled burn in the story, we swap the whole area, this whole piece, including the ground and all the trees in it, with a new piece of artwork, basically, to the post-burn sector, which lets the player walk right through.
It's interesting that like there's kind of this baseline of the world, and then there are these almost just two chunks just sitting right on top of it.
The world is kind of made of tiles in a way, so like we have the option to swap different tiles in and out, and this is a great place to use that technology.
Yeah, it's pretty great.
Hi, Jake.
Hey, Jane. In this garden surrounded by scary mannequins seems like a great place to talk about how you figure out perspective and scale when making a level.
Yeah, so, when you start making a game, one of the first things you need to do is to have scale reference. So, what we did was just download a bunch of free scale models, actually.
Yep, just some royalty-free, T-posed nude men and women.
I think like the man is just the default ZBrush man.
Before you put in the trees and before you put in the grass and before you put in the rocks, when all you have is terrain, it can look like it's like a 6-foot wide hallway, or it's like a 1/4 mile wide, and you can't even tell in first person. But then once, boop, there's just a little nude man out there.
Yeah.
You really know.
Yeah, how tall is this tree? Oh my gosh, it's actually, it's a really tall tree.
Yeah,
it looks tiny before you put the scale man in.
So there's also, you'll notice there's a collection of different scale men out here. When we first dropped our scale our scale people in, they came in with some default material that was like this glistening onyx stone.
I think the default Unity material back then was just some very glossy black.
Yeah, so we had these like just rippling, glistening stone statues, including parts.
Full anatomy.
There were some parts that were very good at catching the light, and I think when Nels was
the
gray boxing,
bikini parts.
yeah, Nels was like, I got to get in real close on some parts of this level, and I just don't know about this. So then the next day when we got latest,
It's very distracting when the gloss material is.
it's debatable though if that's more or less distracting than the jean shorts that were slapped on. It feels to me, Jane, like in early dev, as you got bored, you just kept like festooning the scale man with more stuff.
I think there was one of those times when I was like, is it worth spending 15 minutes to make myself happy?
Yes.
And I was like, yes.
And then
it's
like
worth
maybe
15 minutes
maybe
to put
some more time
jorts
to
on
add some love handles and then like some heart-shaped chest hair. Who's to say? Who's to say?
15 minutes turned into 30 minutes of fun, and now,
Oh man, by the end of the production,
It's
gray
so
box thing
worth
was
it.
really fun. Or like you'd know that there was someone was in there working because you would just see all these like
Yeah.
love-handled jorts, Henry chest hair dudes floating all over the place.
I think my favorite parts is also when you've done level designing a space. Sometimes you've lifted the terrain without lifting the scaleman. So sometimes once in a while I'm like, why is this area kind of not performing great? And I look under the earth and there's like four
There's just
buried
floating
scalemen
never
underneath.
nudes.
And I'm like,
It's fine.
oh, thanks, Jake. Delete.
It's fine. Yeah,
Those are my favorite little Jake surprises.
it's good. Or like you'll see one off in the sky. Like in this case, there's a couple deliberately way out in the distance because I wanted people to look at how forced perspective works. Also, so zoom in on some jorts, guys. Be happy.
Oh, actually, another note about the scale lady here. She's actually the same model that we use for the teens in the lake.
Oh, that's true.
We just added a ponytail, really.
And sparklers.
Thing that is great about Pork Pond, other than it is called Pork Pond, which is a wonderful thing to say. You want to say it?
Pork pond.
Pork Pond. Pork Pond.
It's not even really a pond.
It's barely a pond.
It's like a pork puddle, really.
It's pork puddle. It may have been a pond at one point. Later, dear player, hopefully you noticed that there is a pork pond sign in Delilah's lookout tower. After Delilah has told you, if you talk about Pork Pond, that people just keep stealing the sign.
And
So
how
that's
it
why
looks
there's no
great
sign.
in like a den or
A den, or
a
right in
lookout
front of
cabin,
me.
really.
Yeah, and that's one of those things that was really fun about making this game with such a small team, is that I named Pork Pond after my girlfriend's dog, Pork Belly, who I like very much. He has a Japanese chin, and he is very weird. And then I wrote the goof about the sign not being there because there wasn't a sign. And then the next thing I knew, someone said, "Oh, it should be in Delilah's lookout." I don't know if that was you, Jane, but that's the sort of thing you would do. Is
Might
you'd be like, "I was playing the game, and I felt like that Pork Pond sign should be in Delilah's
like
tower."
if I were Delilah, I would have totally stolen it.
Exactly right. So then we just say yes, and we keep putting goofs into the game. So
Yeah.
that is the Ballad of Pork Pond.
Yes.
Pork
Puddle pond.
Pork Puddle Pond. I like this is our only tape together.
I know. And it's about
And
pork
it was
pond.
just us saying Pork Pond about 15 or 20 times. Pork Pond.
pork pond.
Hi, this is Will.
And this is James again.
And if you look around, you should see a TV in front of you with a pretty weird looking image on it. That is actually what Henry looks like from third person. So you're looking at Henry as we saw him in Unity Editor.
Yeah, Henry is very much sort of an ultimate Cronenberg nightmare. He's got sort of like, we called them the spider bones, where you can stretch his shoulders really far away from his torso. Early on, I remember looking at a GIF with the team of like how Crysis was doing their first-person stuff, and if you looked at it, you could sort of see his spine and neck becoming this mad giraffe creature. And we took that concept and ran with it. So we ended up sort of like almost any animation in the game, if you look at it from outside of the exact angle we want you to, it would completely destroy immersion and you'd be horrified and possibly sick.
Coming up here on the end, Jacob,
Yes, Sean.
Henry and Delilah are talking, and then there's a clatter, and you realize there's just been an open third line on their conversation. And I remember coming up with this, or something like this, I think in my living room before we had an office in the summer and fall of 2013.
Yeah, the idea that you hear someone like cough over the radio seems like the sort of thing that got us really excited when we were in like day zero of talking about making Firewatch.
Yeah, we had another idea back in the lakeside of this day, the beginning of this day, where you would hear your conversation coming out of a radio nearby, but just the way our audio system worked and like the peculiarities of trying to get that to work just never really read to the player when people would play it. But we had all these moments. This is sort of like the way we think about the design of a story like this in general, for better or for worse, at least this game, where we would sit down and just pitch each other all these moments that were really disconnected once we had a conceit, like there's somebody listening to you on the radio, like, oh, a guy punches you out, like, oh, you hear your voice coming from a bush, which we didn't end up using.
You rip your bed apart and find a bug under the mattress.
Oh my God.
Someone was listening in your tower.
Yeah, we were going to bug the tower.
I think we actually had a bulletin board up in the office full of tiny Post-it notes that were just cool ideas.
Cool story things.
And if we could find a place for them, we'd pull them off that and put them on the linear list of like Crit Path events.
Yeah, there's things that we could just sort of like put as little like mile markers in the story, and not knowing how you would get to them because you'd play your own way. But if we had enough of those in the story that were surprising, then maybe you, player, would like it.